Hey guys, this is Torno, and today we're going to be talking about 5 budget commanders for beginners. Now, specifically aimed towards beginners in this video because I feel like beginners kind of, need a little bit more focus, and they typically will go towards things that are slightly different to, the things that more veterans will kind of go to. A couple of things that I've kind of aimed towards, not too many colors. So there are 3 colors max, but usually one of those colors isn't used as much. So like, for example, Voja, white's really only used for a couple different characters and typically like some spells and stuff. And that's really like some instants and sorceries, and that's really it. I didn't want to have, too many mechanics or anything like that. Some pretty simple mechanics across all of them. And, mostly kind of combat focused and stuff as well. Like I wanted to go, mostly just, aiming towards big combats and stuff, because that's a thing that kind of gets new players in a lot. A lot of, aiming away from tutors. So anything that kind of tutors or anything like that, I didn't want to have in here, because tutors are a little bit more difficult for new players because they don't particularly know what's good or what's not yet. They need to play a few more games, in my opinion, before they know exactly what they're kind of looking for as they're looking through their deck and stuff. Just kind of aiming towards making it as easy as possible while also being relatively fun kind of commanders here. And you can kind of see a little bit of a spoiler on the first one. Before we get into it though, a few people have been asking me how they can support the channel. The number one way is just subscribe. If you guys want to subscribe, please feel free. We're up to 1.25 thousand. I am so happy. We're going so well. I love it. The second one is the memberships. You can sign up for the membership. And the third one is going to be our Amazon wish list that you guys should be able to access. There's just going to be a comment that's going to be pinned for that. So our first one here is going to be Voja. Voja is relatively simple. It's just if you've got if you've got elves, put a whole bunch of counters on things when you attack. If you've got wolves, you draw things. It's relatively simple. You can also get away with it very budgetly by just putting in a whole bunch of elves that, by themselves, the elves might not be great. Like the mana dork, like 1 mana elves and stuff like that, like this then, Findhorn elves, that kind of stuff. It might not seem like much, but eventually with Voja, it just becomes an insane, massive creature and stuff. It's just a relatively simple deck. It's just play your elves, play your wolves, go face. There's really not all that much, too complicated about it. It will introduce a little bit of kind of more of the complicated stuff in regards to like, +1/+1 counters and how exactly they work and everything. But that's perfectly fine. I think that kind of balances out. Relatively, the deck just plays relatively simple. It's a way that you can, start out relatively strong as well. Voja is a incredibly strong deck, just a really great deck and stuff. And, once you've got like your Voja, your elves and your wolves, then you can start expanding it out later once they get a little bit more experience with some like, shapeshifters and some changelings and those kinds of things. You can introduce, some more tokens, maybe like, 1 or 2 tutors or something. There's a few different ways that you can kind of take it later on if they love the deck, and you can kind of expand on it. But at the start, you can just go relatively simple. Here's Voja. He's got built-in protection, so they feel less bad when it gets removed and stuff, because someone has to pay more resources for it to be removed. They've got, elves and wolves. Everyone loves elves and wolves. So, there's lots of different ways that you can kind of build it that's going to be great for a new player. The next one here is going to be Krenko. Krenko is just play goblins. It's just goblins, gobbling up all the resources. It's just, Krenko is a very, very simple deck. You just play a whole bunch of goblins and you just go face with them. Later on, you can obviously expand it out, but at the start, just playing goblins and stuff like that is going to be a relatively good way to be able to do it. And then there's, a couple of ways to be able to give people's goblins haste, which kind of introduces them a little bit to that and combat and stuff. And then later on, you can introduce them to, like a tutor. You can introduce them to sacking their goblins, those kinds of things. But at the start, just having a relatively simple way that, your commander goes in, you can tap your commander, and that's going to create goblins. You just count up how many goblins you go, and that's how many goblins you create. There's lots of ways to be able to do that. You know, you've got goblin anthems as well, which is nice. So that way you can, once you've got, you know, your goblins out, then you can buff them up with those. You've got, you know, a couple kind of different enchantments to kind of give them haste and stuff. Like, there's lots of easy ways for this deck to be able to be built. And then later on, obviously, there's ways to be able to expand it out to make it a little bit more, you know, a little bit more challenging, as well as it just being a strong deck. Krenko and Goblins overall are just a relatively good deck for new players, because you can start out small and you can just, you know, build up, and it's very combat focused at the start. Like, when you can build it combat focused, and then later on, you know, chuck in something like, chuck in something like Impact Tremors to start with, kind of introduces them a little bit to the, like, triggers and stuff along those lines. There's lots of cool ways that you can build it. Next, we've got Pantlaza. Pantlaza is probably my favorite of these ones, besides Voja, because Pantlaza is just a really fun commander for new players, because it's just basically, look, this is relatively simple. When you play a dinosaur, you're going to flip cards off the top of your deck until you do this. It's just a great way to be able to do things like that. You know, people love Big Stompy. It's a great way to introduce people to the deck. You know, Pantlaza can easily be like a flicker or blink deck and stuff along those lines, but just big dinos. Just throw big dinos in there, throw the big dinos at people. You know, you've got your dinos come in, you just read your card, and reading the card explains the card, so you can get through it pretty simple. Dinosaurs don't necessarily have very complicated abilities or anything along those lines. There's some that are a little bit more complicated, but generally you've got relatively simple. You've got a big Stompy. You're going to throw that big Stompy at someone. It kind of, you know, because you get to tune out, like, you know, some of the more complicated mechanics, you can just be like, focus down on your threat assessment kind of thing. And here's a couple instances. I think that, you know, having both the red, green, and white kind of introduces you to a couple instants and sorceries in regards to like removing threats and stuff, which is nice. And then green for like ramp, so introducing them to some ramp, introducing them to, you know, if you play this, you're going to be able to, you know, get some extra lands out, which is going to help you cast some bigger stuff. So there's lots of really great ways to be able to build it. Again, pretty budget, because you can just chuck a lot of different dinosaurs in here. You don't necessarily need to go with like the big expensive, like Atali, Primal Conqueror, or anything along those lines. You've just got a lot of simple ones, as well as having a precon, so you can just kind of pick the precon up as well. Next, we've got Cutsil. I wanted to put one in here about +1/+1s, because I think +1/+1s are relatively simple. Cutsil's really good because for a new player, people coming in on your turn and interacting with your board can get a little bit, you know, overwhelming, especially when you are really, really new. So this is going to allow them to, on their turn, they're doing their thing. You're not going to be able to interact with it. You're not going to be able to stop them doing it. Then you can also make it so, you know, they're going to be able to draw cards with their commander, which is nice. Give them kind of more options. You've got a lot of ways to be able to get +1/+1s. Some of them are relatively simple. Some of them are just, you know, whenever a creature enters the battlefield or something like that, put a +1/+1 onto it. So there's lots of different things to be able to do it, like Okami, you know, get +1/+1s. So you can introduce them to some of the like replacement effects and stuff along those lines. So there's lots of very interesting ways to be able to do it, and, you know, relatively simple, and stops people kind of interacting with them on their turn, so that way they can focus on what they're doing without having to worry about, oh no, this person's going to, you know, counter me and stuff. And while that is a part of the game, and it's definitely something you want to introduce them to relatively early on, because, you know, it's something that's going to happen if they've got any other commander, or if the Cutsil's not out or something, then it's going to allow them to be able to focus down on the gameplay to start with, and then expand out later on to some more kind of, you know, commanders that, you know, are more open to people coming in on their turn and stopping them and stuff. Now, the last one here is going to be Winota. So this one is a little bit more complicated, but it's still relatively simple, because it's just kind of go face. You've got hate bears there. You can just, you know, whenever a non-human creature attacks, you get to top of 6. So that's going to be a mini kind of tutor. So it introduces them to tutor light kind of thing. Tutor light. So they're going to be able to kind of, you know, tutor a little bit there. It's going to require them to take a little bit longer, but it's going to be a stronger deck. It's going to be a relatively strong deck. It's got Boros, so you've got a lot of different stuff in there. You can build it incredibly cheaply with just chucking in a whole bunch of different humans and a whole bunch of different non-humans. You've got a lot of different ways to be able to build it that's going to be relatively strong, as well as being a nice introduction to like mini tutors. So I said no tutors at the start, but this is kind of like a mini tutor kind of thing. Not them looking through their whole deck. Instead, it's like a pick between these 6 cards, if like the humans or whatever in it. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of build her out. Just can really go like hard, like CEDH level kind of thing, really strong. However, she can also be a deck that can compete at lower level tables. There's lots of different ways to kind of build her that's going to be relatively useful. It's going to just big stompies, a lot of face focus and stuff like that, a lot of ways to be able to do really cool stuff, and then introduce some of the higher power cards later on that are going to make it so that like introduce them to like some Staxy cards or something along those lines. At the start low, start simple, then kind of expand out later on to be like, hey, okay, let's add in this, or what would you like to do it, or what direction would you like to take this deck kind of thing. But that's it for today. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think, and if you have any suggestions for people, and if you're a new player, check out the suggestions down below as well. I hope you guys had a wonderful day, and goodbye.